Calls up Dr. Askew, William Martin, and Dr. Marks. We'll start with the panel from my left to your right, and we'll reserve the questions of the members up here until after all the panel testifies, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, we're just trying to move things along as quickly as we can. Have a long night, a lot of witnesses. Please state your full name for the record, your position on the bill, and who you represent.
Yes, my name is William Martin. I direct and represent the drug policy program at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, as well as myself, and I'm speaking in support of HB 1365.
Very good. Thank you. Proceed, sir.
You will have already in your binders a paper that my colleague and I, Dr. Catherine Neal Harris, has written about a longer section, and I've just handed out an op-ed that appeared in the Houston Chronicle and probably the Express News today. And
we appreciate that, and we appreciate you not reading the whole thing.
I don't plan to do that, and you also have other testimony. What I want to talk about mostly is it's important in talking about this is to see what it is that makes cannabis a real medicine, and not the legalization of medical cannabis is not just a step a stepping stone to legalize recreational cannabis. Beginning in 1965, and when starting with and supported for decades by the National Institutes of Health, Israeli scientist Dr. Raphael Mechoulam and his colleagues have turned Israel into what is called the Holy Land of medical marijuana. But what they have done is to, first of all, starting with just the cannabis plant and saying, what's going on in this plant? Dr. Mechoulam isolated THC. Later on, they isolated CBD. And then over a couple of decades, they figured something out. In our bodies, we have receptors, they call them tetrahydrocannabinol and then cannabidiol, naming it after the plant Cannabis sativa. They figured out that we have in our bodies what they call cannabis receptors, and they named them CB1 and CB2. The first one is in the brain and throughout the central nervous system. Others are in the gastrointestinal system and the immune system. As the Canadian magazine The Scientist said, your bodies are teeming with weed receptors. Now they saw that in these plants where they've been isolating these parts, they saw that these elements, that in our bodies we had molecules, cannabinoid producers that were just like those things. And so they say, what is this receptor here? And they said, we presume that cannabinoid receptors did not exist did not depend for their existence on an external plant. And so what they did was to see that together these receptors and cannabinoids constitute the endocannabinoid system. And the key reason that exists in our bodies is to maintain homeostasis, to keep things on an even keel by reducing pain, reducing inflammation, controlling nausea, uplifting from depression and anxiety, and moderating and curing some diseases. When the endogenous system is not strong enough to produce to do this, then external cannabinoids can bring things back into order. Now, some efforts by pharmaceutical companies have tried to take one of these, THC or CBD, and just use that one. Dr. Mechoulam said he prefers to think of it as the entourage effect, that using the whole plant works better than just isolating one or two or three chemicals. I have talked to veterans who have talked to me about going to VA, having the VA hand out pills like Skittles and leaving them as pilled up zombies. And the cannabis, smoking, as my friend Major Bass has said, and others the same story, it is not a gateway to other drugs, but release from alcohol and giving them their lives back, giving themselves back to their children. And you've heard the mamas, who are friends of mine as well, and have interviewed them. They talk about how it enables them to have have to be able to manage their children in a way that is at least reasonably acceptable.
Mr. Martin, we really appreciate that explaining that, and you all get to explain even further with further questions. Representative Lucio is going to have a lot of questions for you, but we want to, and I do too, at least one or two. But let's go on to the next panelist if we can. Please state your name for the record, your position on the bill, and who you represent.
I'm Dr. Robert Marks, pain management physician here in Austin. I am in support of this bill heavily, and I represent hundreds of doctors with whom I've spoken. I do so on behalf of over 28 million Texas patients, whether they need this now or they may need it one day in the future, including all of you and your families, including Representative Lucio's child. Congratulations on the tooth loss. I'm a Texas pain physician. I have dual board certifications in both pain management as well as anesthesiology. I've treated thousands of patients with debilitating illnesses, and I've seen the consequences of the opioid epidemic firsthand. And it's not pretty. It's not good. I first learned about medical cannabis during my grand rounds during my fellowship in pain management at Texas Tech back in 2011 and 2012. And I'll be honest, initially, when I chose that as my topic, I just thought it was going to be entertaining dinner party conversation and kind of cool. It wasn't until I really dove into the science behind cannabis, realized not only the safety associated with the drug, but its potential impact, not only in treating all of these different ailments, but also in what it's able to do to actually decrease various types of incidents of various types of maladies, including multiple types of cancer. I continue to follow all of the scientific literature because I became a very heavy supporting advocate of medical cannabis at that point in time. I follow scientific literature, I analyze, I scrutinize, I discuss this regularly with medical doctors as well as healthcare professionals pretty much anytime I have the opportunity to. I've spoken with thousands of them about this. I also cleared my entire clinic schedule to be able to be here today.
Thank you.
So it's just to let you know how dedicated I truly am for this. It's not fun to do. But with that said, I want to be clear. I have zero financial interest in Texas cannabis. Absolutely zero. In fact, if this type of legislation were to pass, it would probably negatively impact my bottom line at the end of the day. According to CDC data, 130 Americans die daily of opioid overdoses. Now, when you look at census data, that extrapolates to approximately a little bit more than 11 Texans on a daily basis. Now, they die because they stop breathing. States with medical cannabis bills have approximately 25% reduction in opioid overdose deaths. They also have a significant reduction in non-fatal opioid overdoses, emergency room visits associated with opioids, and prescription numbers for opioids. Medicare data also shows significant reductions in prescriptions for anxiety, depression, nausea, psychosis, seizures, sleep disorders, and spasticity. In a time when opioid overdose is the #1 cause of accidental death in our country, it is a major ethical challenge to restrict patients from an adjunct drug that not only decreases patients' demand for opioids, but also has a significant better safety profile. Cannabis has zero effect on breathing and heart rate, which is the reason there's never been a documented fatal overdose of opioids. That is cannabis. Cannabis.
Yes.
That is in contrast to drugs that do exist, such as Xanax, Valium, opioids, Ambien. There are countless drugs that are significantly more dangerous, including even anti-inflammatories that increase the risk of coronary artery disease and stomach ulcers.
Doctor, thank you so much. We heard a lot of that earlier this morning. I find it fascinating. But if we could move on to the next panelist, and then there'll be some questions for you. Thank you.
Okay, because I will say I had a lot of other perspectives from a practicing pain doctor to share.
I'm sure you do.
I'll look forward to the questions.
But we have a lot of witnesses tonight. And
I have a lot of respect for you guys, so
thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Please state your name for the record, your position on the bill, and who you represent.
Dr. Wendy Askew. I am a regenerative medicine physician from San Antonio, Texas. I represent my patients.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought I did register for
You
this
registered earlier this morning on another bill.
I registered for, it was my intent to register for both in favor of, in support of HB 1365.
Well, can you?
Yes, I'm happy to re-register.
Oh, yeah. Would you do that very quickly,
Absolutely.
please?
Mm-hmm.
And while we wait on that, let me be the first one to ask a question, and I think I'll ask you, Doctor.
Well, they're both doctors.
Well, I understand that. But, well, now I understand that, but that's not how you're registered, so I apologize. Doctors. I am a lawyer, but I have a biology chemistry degree, and I spent quite a bit of time in biochemistry. And so I find the testimony concerning the biochemical makeup of cannabis and its extracts quite fascinating. And that's why your testimony is very, very fascinating to me. My question is why don't we hear more about it concerning the biochemical makeup of cannabis in that regard?
Oh, we're starting to.
Your name, sir?
William Martin. We are starting to. There's a good bit available, especially on the web. You have to be looking for it. But I'm hearing more and more. 2 or 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, when I was working on an article for Texas Monthly about PTSD, and it was asked, well, why does it work? Well, it just works. And then I said, I need to find out why this works. And that's when I learned about the endocannabinoid system. I said, why don't we hear that? And that's why in my testimony, what I wrote was that we need to start with understanding why this works. And I think we do need to say more and more about it, so that and these op-ed pieces, the report that I've written that my colleague and I have written, we start off. This is what we need to start with: is understanding what's going on here and why it works.
Well, I will be reading that, I promise you, Doctor.
I would say from
name again for the record.
Robert Marks.
Very good.
I would say from a slightly different standpoint, a couple of different factors. One, I can tell you, at least in the state of Texas, doctors and professionals in general are exceedingly scared to come forward and actually discuss this. This topic is taboo amongst doctors with patients because, quite frankly, we're scared to be able to discuss this. I'm scared to be here right now. To be quite honest, I had a lot of stuff in my testimony last night, and I went through that with my wife with a fine-tooth comb last night, and she's like, no, don't say that. You're gonna you're putting yourself too far out there. And I feel ethically that it's appropriate to come out here because I know and understand my ethical duty as a physician to come out and do this.
So you've basically explained to us, at least in a nutshell, why then, at least somebody like me who has this background from many years ago and spent quite a bit of time in the lab, why I hadn't read more about it, heard more about it, but hopefully we will in the future. Now if we could turn to the next witness.
Dr. Adrian Askew, one more comment to this point. One reason.
Just a second.
Adrian.
Very good. Your position on the bill, who you represent?
I represent myself and my patients, and I am in favor of the bill. Thank
Very
you,
good. Very
Representative Lucio.
Thanks.
To the point, one reason why you don't hear more about it is because it is not taught in medical schools. So physicians are unaware of its existence, and it takes physicians to step out of their comfort zone to go fly in the face of their colleagues who are telling them there's no research, and pursue at their time, cost, and personal risk education and knowledge about this system. And most doctors don't feel like they have the time or the inclination to learn about it. So that's one editorial comment.
Well, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Representative Lucio.
Thank you. Well, man, I'm an environmentalist, but we killed some trees. I will recycle this. One of the things I hear when I'm trying to get support for this bill is we can only support conditions where there is significant medical research. And what I'm starting to understand is saying we're only going to allow a certain condition to qualify for participation in the compassionate use program is completely misunderstanding how this or any medicine works, right? Because what medicine does, it doesn't treat a disease, it treats the symptoms of the disease, right? So that's why we elaborated and not just listed conditions in the bill, or at least a substitute will do that. Talk to me about symptoms and interaction, and I think that you're exactly right. What people say, there's not enough science. I think there's plenty of science out there. It's how we put it together, doctor, and how we can very simply articulate it so that my colleagues say, okay, well, that makes sense, let's do this.
I would love to address that, Dr. Adrian Askew. Just for the record,
Yes, would you identify yourself again, please?
Dr. Adrian Askew.
And I ask when each one of you testifies, it's important for the record we do that. I don't want to interrupt you.
Of course. I haven't given my 2-minute testimonial, but just addressing the questions.
Go ahead.
And to that point, there are nearly 20,000 peer-reviewed publications on the PubMed website specifically citing cannabinoid medicine and how it works to affect different systems. And I would be delighted to explain to you how it works at the regulatory level that Dr. Williams spoke about to bring our imbalanced systems, which are disease states, whether it's lupus, psoriasis, anxiety, PTSD, how it works on those cells involved to bring them back into balance. It cannot leave them permanently in balance, but it can restore balance temporarily, so you need to continue dosing. It doesn't provide a cure, but it provides a safe, effective, nearly risk-free, side effect-free therapeutic option for patients who I think deserve it for a variety of conditions.
And
Doctor, I'm sorry, Dr. Askew, you did not finish laying out or didn't finish your opening with us?
I didn't give my
Yeah, I'm
words.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
We went off on this other tangent, but would you please finish
Yes.
that up, and then I'll turn it over.
My 2 minutes. I was going to speak from the standpoint of the autoimmune conditions. So I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force. I'm a physician. I'm a mother. I have an autoimmune condition called psoriasis, developed while I was on active duty, so I am assigned a 90% disability rating. My condition is where my immune system attacks my skin, and at its most severe form, over 80% of my body, my skin and my joints were involved, and the skin was replaced with thick scales, plaques, red, inflamed areas, and I was treated with the conventional therapeutics for autoimmune diseases, which carry side effects to include risks for tuberculosis, lymphomas, other cancers, kidney and liver damage, and bone marrow suppression. I was fortunate never to develop any of those conditions and that I had decent response. But then I began to seek alternative therapies. Stem cells provided an excellent response under the Right to Try Act that you all passed a few years back. And then once that effect wore off, I began experimenting with cannabinoids. And CBD oil has allowed me to wean completely off of Humira and have better control of my psoriatic symptoms than in the past 19 years. And so I have a personal as well as a professional academic interest in this medicine. It's left me very, very happy and side effect free, and without my $1,200 a month copays for the Humira injections. So I have both personal and professional interests. 20% of the population suffer from autoimmune diseases, and if we had the time, I would love to explain at the mechanistic level how it works on our immune system and at the level of each organ system to bring those systems back into balance and to prevent our immune system from its hyperactive incorrect responses and attacking self instead of just foreign invaders.
Thank you so much. Representative Lucille, members, y'all have any questions? Lucille?
I do.
Yeah.
And the reason why I do, and I don't want anyone testifying after this to take offense if I'm not asking the same questions. The reason I'm asking these questions is the science and what doctors are telling us is extremely important for me to go and advocate for these bill with my colleague. That is the tipping point. What is the science? What are doctors telling us we can do with this? So I need to extrapolate from you as much information as I can, and frankly work with you after this to continue to understand and articulate. I'm a lawyer. I went to law school because I wasn't smart enough to go to medical school. If you can explain it to me so that I can regurgitate this, and there's a few points I want to get through. Tell me why this is safer than opioids, so that I could explain it to my 9-year-old.
I would love to address that. The biggest factor associated with it being safer than opioids, flat out, the brainstem, which is the part of our brain that controls our drive to breathe and heart rate, has almost zero receptors for cannabinoids. For that reason, it plain and simply does not affect it. One could utilize as much cannabis as they could possibly muster, and yet they would still not stop breathing. Their heart rate would not be modified. They would not have an overdose death. Whereas opioids, as we all know, definitively does cause the respiratory depression. When considering the relative safety, especially compared to opioids, we need to consider as physicians, and this is one of the reasons that I feel so strongly that doctors need to be able to determine the indication so that we're able to practice medicine just like we do with any other FDA drug to be able to prescribe off-label for an indication, is the fact that it is safe to try for any condition, and if it fails to help, that's okay. It doesn't have to help. You don't have to continue utilizing it as a patient. But to strictly wait until we have an indication for it and then be allowed to try it just to find that it may or may not work, I find a little bit dangerous. But ultimately, the short answer to the question is it doesn't affect heart rate, it doesn't affect breathing, which it's compared to even benzodiazepines and lots of other drugs, not even just opioids. It's safer than most.
Okay. And in terms of addictive qualities, and any of you, please answer. Just in comparison to opioids, it seems like what I take from that testimony is that it's hard to overdose or almost impossible to overdose on cannabis, but because opioids can affect breathing and heart, there is a chance that even the first time using opioids, if used irresponsibly, you could have a problem. But talk about the long term, and I want all of you all to weigh in if you could.
I would love to address the opioid component and then get y'all's take on it as well, just because I do deal with this fairly regularly. For what it's worth, I'm not one of the pain doctors that regularly prescribes opioids. Very few of my patients are actually on opioids comparatively. But the way I discuss it with my patients when it comes down to opioids is you start out, you take one pill once a day. It's just like caffeine, just like coffee. You can have one small cup of coffee once a day. You could do that for your entire life, and that'll always give you a little bit of pick-me-up, your morning coffee. When you start having a cup of coffee twice a day, it might not work as well. Then you get to a point where you're having a cup of coffee every 4 hours. Then you need 2 cups of coffee every 4 hours. Then you end up switching to Red Bull. Then it's 2 Red Bulls. And then what you end up figuring out, and everybody that's gone to medical school and law school, and probably everybody else in the room as well, realizes that at some point you're actually more tired from all of that caffeine than you would be by not having any caffeine. And we all know, with caffeine at least, I got to get off of all this caffeine. But opioids do the same thing to the body. It stops working after a certain amount of time. But just like with caffeine, if we stop drinking that caffeine, we feel even worse. Opioids don't do that with energy, comparatively with caffeine, which does do that with energy. Opioids do that with pain. So when you take opioids and then you stop taking opioids, you simply hurt more. So you have this feeling like you truly require that opioid medication in order to maintain pain control. Now, I'm not going to say that cannabis, I know technically they say there's not an actual physical addiction to cannabis, but just like so many other types of drugs, there's no question that somebody that utilizes cannabis and finds that it actually yields some degree of benefit might have some properties that make somebody actually seek and desire to continue to use that. However, again, when comparing the relative safety compared to opioids and the fact that a lot of the detrimental effects associated with cannabis, such as the psychological effects, start to wane with long-term use, and you continue to get a lot of the actual clinical benefits. The benefits for cannabis do maintain themselves. I do feel I should probably turn some of this over to the other guys.
And I am going to be mindful of time, so I want to get to another point that I wanted to cover on the medical panel. Talk to me about THC and different levels of THC and how that impacts the treatment of the very symptoms that we're looking to address in this bill.
Well, THC is what gives you it's the high that made marijuana famous, and that's and if it comes in very small doses, you get less of an effect. If it comes in larger doses, there is more of an effect. It is a possibility there is a possible addiction, or about 9 to 10% of people who use marijuana heavily over time can develop a dependence on it. With other drugs as well, part of that, a significant part of that, can be genetic vulnerability. You can have, just like you have alcoholics in your family, you're more likely to develop an alcohol problem if you drink.
Yeah. And I'm not just speaking to addiction. What I want you to address is our bodies have different deficiencies, and one of the deficiency and I think cannabinoid deficiency is a deficiency that where you need the use of this.
That's right, to bring it back.
So to say 0.5 THC is what is going to help everyone who is in need of this medicine is just frankly not true because of our deficiencies. A 0.5 for me might be well more than enough, but for someone else who has a deficiency, you know where
Yes,
I'm going with
yes.
that, Doctor. Can you address that?
Dr. Adrian Askew,
Yeah.
I can. That is one of the frustrations, even for doctors who do pursue training in cannabis medicine, is the imprecise nature and the inability to state without initiating therapy what level, amount, concentration, ratios, mixtures are going to best suit a patient. We have some ideas for conditions like cancer. You need much higher THC content to slow the development of the abnormal blood vessels that the cancer cells stimulate. But to your point, the cardinal teachings of cannabis medicine are that you start at low concentrations because one dose range will have maybe a completely therapeutic effect for one person with a condition, and another person with the same condition, same height, same weight, same ethnic background, they may require a higher dose. But you have to start low and gradually increase their dose until you achieve a response.
And what is the medical reason that they need a high dose? Talk to me about the deficiency.
I can speak to certain conditions, and for example, we mentioned the cancer lineages and how cancer cells stimulate the growth of abnormal blood vessels so that the cancer cells will be spread and disseminated and metastasize. One of the properties of THC at higher doses is it stops the proliferation of the abnormal blood vessels that the cancer cells are stimulating. It does not affect any of the normal blood vessels. It simply isolates its effect to that abnormal, imbalanced system that is going on. And that is what scientists and doctors, and even Dr. Meshulam's lab, they cannot say, you need this amount, you need that amount. It's frustrating for doctors and for the pharmaceutical industry because we're comfortable with the model of 5 milligrams helps this much and 50 milligrams helps a lot, and that's not how this medicine functions. So it renders it, from the language of one of the other bills, to say 1% THC and 10% CBD. That's not based on any science. Those numbers appear to have been randomly chosen, and doctors who prescribe, recommend, dispense cannabis are usually aware of this, how to dose it and how to begin, and then how to gradually increase it until you find a desired effect and then remain at that level.
It's William Martin. It's the same with CBD and the put just a little tighter than you did. Start low and go slow.
So let's start low and go slow, and don't be afraid to go all the way.
That's right. Just go. And Major Bass was talking about, what was he said? 28%.
Mm-hmm.
18 to 24%.
That's a high concentration.
That's a high concentration. I tend to run at a pretty homeostatic level. I suspect that would be way too much for me. And I experimented with marijuana very timidly in the early 1970s, 5 or 6 times, depending on whether you count the time at Willie Nelson's house when I did not inhale.
God bless Texas.
But that is true. You just do it until it's working, until you're getting an effect. But this earlier, and I think you've talked about working with cancer. You said it only treats symptoms. I can't find the site right now, but I read it and copied it. About a year and a half ago, I was looking. I have 2 cancers that I'm dealing with, and you don't need to feel sorry for me about that. They're serious, but they're being treated well. But I was talking with my doctor, and he was looking on the website, and he showed, and the National Cancer Institute was talking about preclinical, because we don't allow doing in this country, we don't allow the experiments and research on humans nearly as well as they do in Israel. But the preclinical tests and one stuck with me particularly, of glioblastoma, brain cancer, of 29 tests, tumors had been either reduced or emptied or cured in 28 cases. And they were calling for more research. In 2017, the NIH had support for 330 projects, all of them dealing with the endocannabinoid system, with about 140 million. And again, if you go to Israel, there's no shortage of research. We can't do the research here as much because, according to the DEA, cannabis has no medical benefit.
I think I'm only getting one more comment. So, Doc, why don't you wrap it up for us on this panel?
And Dr. Marks, if you just again identify yourself.
Oh, okay.
When you speak. Thank
So,
you.
again, Dr. Robert Marks. So I was actually just going to expand on actually the entourage effect. There's a lot of discussion that I've heard take place, and I heard take place earlier today. There appears to be a very significant misconception about it only being THC and CBD. First off, you can actually have a product that has the exact same concentration of THC and CBD, the exact same ratio, the exact same concentration, that actually has completely different effects on the patients. And that's based on the other components. They've isolated over 85, I've actually heard numbers up to 113 different cannabinoids. And the way I frequently will describe this when I talk to people about this is it's analogous to the 88 keys on a piano. You can have my 4-year-old just hitting middle C over and over again. That might be just CBD, that might be just CHC. You can also have somebody playing the piano. You can have Beethoven playing the piano, you can have Marilyn Manson playing the piano, and you can have George Strait playing the piano. I'll be better at the guitar. But the fact is, I would not prescribe Representative Guerra Marilyn Manson. Maybe I would. I don't know. I don't know you all that well. But the fact is,
Because he's not represented.
well, in that case, maybe I would give him Marilyn. Maybe he could have Marilyn Manson.
Musical chairs on you. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay.
But there's a very significant distinction between these, and so first off, the full panel testing is actually I feel a fairly critical component of how this could actually ultimately come out. The other thing is just taking into consideration the fact that it's our ethical duty as medical doctors to be able to actually discuss this with patients. When we're up here discussing this with you guys, we're I don't know if we're under oath or not, but we're certainly here doing what I act as if we're under oath.
Right.
But
you are. Yeah.
But good. But when we're talking to patients, we have to be very, very careful about what we say and how we say it. We can have a discussion about it. We have an ethical duty. We've got a First Amendment right. We've got recommendations, both federal judges that have said before, we have to be truthful with our patients. We need to speak to them about their best interest, answer their questions, discuss with them about everything, especially when it comes to their safety. But the fact is, patients are reading about this. It's available in every state surrounding us. It's able to be flown in from California, where they're not restricting it at the airports. We're not going to be able to stop it from coming in here. So not only patients are reading about it, they're trying it. They're asking their doctors about it. People are reading about it. People are using it as medicine. They know that there's minimal risk. They know that it may help with so many different medical maladies. They know that the literature is vast. They know it's legal in 33 states. And as a doctor in the state of Texas, I will declare personally that this is, in fact, a medicine. This should be an option. All I ask is you guys please, on behalf of patients and doctors, you guys
Thank you for waiting on this time.
Thank you, Dr. Marks. Appreciate you. Any other questions for these professionals? Thank you all. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time.